Good morning, and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Cole, today's worship associate. On this cold and snowy morning, spring morning, come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Do we have any announcements? Okay, no announcements. Food basket. Here in Idaho Falls, okay? And that will end just before the official change for the seniors. Okay, so let me just summarize because we have people online. Yeah. So the date, there is a protein drive going on. You've announced that before, I think, and that will end on the week before Easter. And so you can bring your food items, canned foods, etc., to the church. Sure, or you can write a check. Or a chart and just put on the memo what that's going to be for. Okay, and it goes to the food basket. Yes. Right. Thank you. Please note that if you have joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones that have affected your life in the recent past, and that you would like to share with us, you can do so by filling out small slips of paper that you'll find there at the entrance to the church. Thank you. I invite you now to enter into the spirit of worship with words by Reverend Bill Schultz. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Please join me. Yeah. Please join me in reading the Church's covenant, which is printed in your order service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now light the flaming chalice, symbol of our faith, to illumine this day with words by Reverend Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem The Higher Pantheism by Alfred Lord Tennyson. The sun, the moon, the stars, the seas, the hills and the plains, are not these, O soul, the vision of him who reigns? Is not the vision he, though he be not that which he seems? Dreams are true while they last, and do we not live in dreams? Earth, these solid stars, this weight of body and limb, are they not sign and symbol of thy division from him? Dark is the world to thee, thyself art the reason why. For is he not all but thou, that hast power to feel, I am I? Glory about thee without thee, and thou fulfillest thy doom, making him broken gleams and a stifled splendor and gloom. Speak to him, thou, for he hears, and spirit with spirit can meet. Closer is he than breathing, and nearer than hands and feet. God is law, say the wise, O soul, and let us rejoice. For if he thunder by law, the thunder is yet his voice. Law is God, say some. No God at all, says the fool. For all we have power to see is a straight staff bent in a pool. And the ear of man cannot hear, and the eye of man cannot see. But if we could see and hear this vision, were it not he? I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Let's get it down here for me. Today's story is A Kite for the Moon by Jane Yolen, Heidi E.Y. Semple, and Matt Phelan. And today's story is dedicated to Neil Armstrong and a little about him, the first person on the moon. It's been more than 50 years, folks. Hard to believe. So this is for Neil Armstrong, who showed us the way. It was morning, and moon was alone in the sky. The stars were all abed. No one was below singing to her. No one was sending up rockets or writing poems about her. No one was taking her photograph or painting her picture. Moon began to feel terribly sorry for herself. Ever have a day like that? Down below, a very small boy flying his kite on the beach near his house looked up at Moon. Moon, he called up to her. Don't be sad. He ran as far as he could, all the way to the edge of the water, where Moon sat on the horizon. There he is at the edge of the sand. Yes. He tried to hug Moon, as his mother did to him whenever he was unhappy. But Moon was too far away. Days went by, years. Moon waxed and waned. She counted shooting stars and meteors. She worried about peace down on Earth and strange objects whizzing by. She eclipsed. And here's a little satellite. Many nights the boy watched Moon through a telescope his father had given him. A little bit bigger now. Many days he sent up a new kite for Moon. Red kites, blue kites, green kites, yellow. Some fell back to Earth. Some disappeared into the sky, giving Moon offerings. And Moon watched the boy grow. Every day the boy studied hard. He learned his large numbers, his small sums. He learned algebra and equations. He learned geometry. He tried to square the circle. He learned all about the sky and the moon. And my, he's growing up. He learned to ride a bicycle, drive a car, fly a plane, and a rocket. And then one day when he had learned enough, he went up, up, up in a big rocket ship with a fiery tail. Hello, Moon, he said. I've come for that visit. And the whole world watched. And that's the end.
Yeah, since we don't have any children to sing out, we'll go right to joys and concerns. We now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones, a time to share with this religious community events that have affected your life in the recent past, and to speak out for those we want to hold in our thoughts. I have two of them here. One is from Courtney Higley. After surviving being brought back after surgery, going to the ER twice, and getting in a car accident in the last 2 weeks or so, I am so grateful for caring people. I am so grateful to be alive. Every breath is a gift. And a joy from Victoria. The symphony last night was spectacular. 2 young gifted musicians followed by a symphony using the in-house organ. Yes, indeed. And the last piece was very emotional. Thank you. Do we have more joys and concerns online? No. Thank you. We light one last candle to lift up these joys and concerns, as well as the ones that remain in the silence of our hearts.
Our reading this morning is from the book Spinoza's Religion, a new reading of the Ethics by Claire Carlyle. Successive generations of readers of Spinoza's book, Theologico-Political Treatise, published in 1671, have repeated the charge of atheism at Spinoza, though during the last century this has increasingly been meant as a compliment, as secularist readers champion Spinoza as an early pioneer of their own worldview. An alternative interpretation of Spinoza emerged toward the end of the 18th century, when certain radical thinkers, particularly in Germany, read him as a deeply religious thinker. In 1787, some German philosophers put forward a Christianized Spinozism, setting the scene for the German Romantic poet Novalis to claim Spinoza as a, quote, God-intoxicated man. While we can admire Spinoza's Romantic readers for their creativity and expansive spirit, their representations of his philosophy are often unreliable. As J.A. Froude wrote in a clear-eyed introduction to Spinozism published in the Westminster Review in 1855, the Herder and Schleiermacher school have claimed him as a Christian, a position which no little disguise was necessary to make tenable. The Orthodox Protestants and Catholics have called him an atheist, which is still more extravagant, and even a man like Novalis could find no better name for him than a Gotttrunkener Mann, a God-intoxicated man. With due allowance for exaggeration, such a name would describe tolerably the transcendental mystics. But with what justice can it be applied to the cautious, methodical Spinoza, who carried his thoughts about with him for 20 years, deliberately shaping them, and who gave them at last to the world in a form more severe than had ever been attempted before with such subjects? With him, as with all great men, there was no effort after sublime emotions. He was a plain, practical person. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. In 1929, Albert Einstein was already a famous physicist, probably the most famous physicist of all time, because of his little understood general theory of relativity and for being the recipient of the 1921 Nobel Prize for his work on the photoelectric effect. That year, he received a telegram from Rabbi Herbert Goldstein asking the question, "Do you believe in God?" Einstein's response to Rabbi Goldstein was, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and doings of mankind." And over the years that followed, whenever the question of God came up, "I believe in Spinoza's God" was Einstein's standard response. It is hard for us to know much about Einstein's religious beliefs with any certainty, since he left no extensive theological writings or notable commentaries about religion, or other than passages in a few letters. But Spinoza was often mentioned in these letters, and Einstein also indicated his disdain for traditional Judaism. In one of his letters from 1954, for example, he wrote, "For me, the unadulterated Jewish religion is, like all other religions, an incarnation of primitive superstition. And the Jewish people, to whom I gladly belong, and in whose mentality I feel profoundly anchored, still for me does not have any different kind of dignity from all other peoples. As far as my experience goes, they are in fact no better than other human groups, even if they are protected from the worst excesses by a lack of power. Otherwise, I cannot perceive anything chosen about them." And is a sentiment that could have easily been voiced roughly 3 centuries earlier by the Dutch Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza, whose theology Einstein admired. So who was this enigmatic Baruch Spinoza, and what is the nature of Spinoza's God that made it so appealing to Einstein? Baruch Spinoza, who published under his Latinized pen name Benedictus de Spinoza, was born in Amsterdam in 1632 and died in The Hague in 1677 at the age of 44. He lived his entire life in the Dutch Republic under the relatively tolerant religious policies of the Dutch Reformed Church, allowing him to explore radical Enlightenment era thinking that likely would have seen him burned at the stake in many other European countries in those days, especially since he was of Portuguese Jewish ancestry. And while it is difficult to characterize Spinoza's religious beliefs for reasons I will discuss in a moment, we do know that, like Einstein, he did not adhere to the Judaism of his birth. Because of his controversial ideas about the nature of God and the authenticity of the Hebrew Scriptures, at the age of 23, he was censured by the Jewish community of Amsterdam with a cherem, the Jewish ecclesiastical equivalent of being excommunicated and shunned by the community, including his own family. As his contemporaries began to read his published works, it was clear that he was someone whose radical ideas were profound and well argued. He was offered a number of prestigious teaching positions, all of which he turned down. Instead, he lived a simple life, earning a living as a grinder of optical lenses. It is recorded that he died of a lung illness, and some have speculated that his premature death may have been due to silicosis from inhaling glass dust. Within 2 years of his death, his books were placed on the Roman Catholic Church's Index of Forbidden Books, and they were even banned in the Dutch Republic for containing, quote, "very many profane, blasphemous, and atheistic propositions." Owning, reading, distributing, copying, and even restating his ideas was forbidden. And this says a lot about how innovative, aka heretical, his thinking was. Even in the 17th century, You really had to push the envelope to be banned in this haven of dissidents like Holland. Nevertheless, Spinoza's thinking has been so attractive to readers over the centuries, especially among more liberal thinkers, that it seems everyone wants to claim him as one of their own. He has been called a Christian, a Buddhist, a Jew, a pantheist, an atheist, and a secularist. And I would describe him as a kind of Western Taoist. His ideas seem to transform in the mind of the beholder. And some have even claimed he wrote with deliberate deception when his more traditional God language and ideas did not align with their own preconception about his true theology. And though he is now mentioned among notables such as Kant and Descartes in the development of modern philosophy, it is even contentious whether you can call Spinoza's thinking theology or philosophy. As Claire Carlyle writes, philosophers little acquainted with theological concepts such as divine transcendence or with theological debates concerning the relationship between divine and human agency tend not to consider how Spinoza contributes to these questions. Theologians, accepting philosophers' judgments that Spinoza is a pantheist or atheist, usually assume that he simply rejects their conception of God and do not expect his book, The Ethics, to reward close reading. Such a powerful and complicated thinker as Spinoza seems truly deserving of our attention as Unitarian Universalists. He is one of those historical figures we might like to posthumously claim as part of our own religious heritage. So how might we describe the essential ideas of Spinoza's theology? Foremost, it is important to think of Spinoza as a true example of an Enlightenment rationalist. Along with philosophers like Descartes and Leibniz, Spinoza believed that human reason was the fundamental path to knowledge. His speculations are methodical and built on a series of logical deductions. He does not offer vague mystical insights without explanation, even if, as I have noted, readers have interpreted his words to contain a host of contradictory meanings. He believed in exploring the meaning of existence and the nature of God and the universe through observation and reason, though he did not fully embrace the reductionism and more scientific approach of other thinkers of his time, such as Galileo. Early in part 1 of the Ethics, under the title On God, Spinoza states the crux of his theology. God is everywhere, and everything that exists is a modification of God. From this statement, Spinoza has been called a classic pantheist. In fact, some variation on this statement is usually the very definition of pantheism you see in print, so it would be hard to argue otherwise. But once you dig a little deeper into how Spinoza understands the nature of God, it is debatable whether the theism part of the label is really accurate. It becomes clear that Spinoza's concept of God is not the God of Abraham or anything resembling the traditional theistic God embraced by most of Spinoza's contemporaries, or by most Christian, Jewish, and Muslim believers today. A personal God who intervenes in the world, to whom we can pray for assistance. He viewed an anthropomorphic concept of God and belief in miracles as trappings of a superstitious and outdated religion. Instead, Spinoza conceived of God as the infinite, eternal substance in which all being resides, which he named with the Latin phrase Deus sive natura, which means God or nature, to emphasize the unity of creation. He spoke about God as the substance of the universe, consisting of infinite attributes, each of which expresses eternal and infinite essence. Being in God was the state of all things. And he conceived of humanity as being one mode within the substance of God, each of us possessing unique attributes. And it is through exploring the attributes of God through reason, such as learning about the physical reality of the world, that we can come to know and participate in God. The waters become a little muddied, though, when you consider that he still described God with terms like the highest good. And he spoke of blessings and importance in the importance in the ethical journey as a pathway to salvation. This is why I think of Spinoza as a kind of Western Taoist, conceiving of a God that flows through everything like the Tao, but still trying to retain some of the theological language and concepts of Judeo-Christian thought. When it came to living a virtuous life in harmony with this non-traditional God, Spinoza revealed the influence of Stoic and Neoplatonist philosophers in his thinking, and particularly his favorite, Seneca. He believed the universe, God, or nature had its own purpose, and the wise person strives to understand this purpose through reason and accept where it leads. For Spinoza, this alignment with nature's purpose was the equivalent of following God's will. And it was the way to personal happiness. His ethics describes the ethical journey as a striving to be virtuous, that is, demanding, requiring effort, learning, and growth. As Carlyle writes, religious life consists in keeping to this demanding path, or perhaps more realistically, in returning to it again and again. Its task is to appropriate, live out, and remain faithful to the truth of our being in God, the truth that constitutes the core of Spinoza's theology. Spinoza proposed there were two ways of looking at life as we journey through this struggle. One was from an egocentric, limited point of view that he called subspecie durationis, under the aspect of time, and the other was looking at life globally and eternally, what he called subspecie eternitatis, under the aspect of eternity. Life would always be a struggle between these two perspectives. The sensual world pulled us under the aspect of time, and our reason and intellectual exploration allowed us to see globally and eternally, allowing us, as Spinoza said, to participate in eternal totality. It was his vision of life, liberated from the pettiness of the ordinary world. Having only touched on the main points of Spinoza's theology, you can appreciate why it would have been challenging for most 17th century people to comprehend, and it still is. But the biggest problem Spinoza faced was that he was trying to reimagine the meaning of religion as a somewhat ambiguous way of life centered on being in God, in a time that the theologian Harvey Cox has described as the age of belief, a time when orthodox religious authorities tried to limit theological innovation and define acceptable beliefs through doctrine. It was hard for most people then and now to conceive of a so-called religion without creedal affirmations, sacraments, or belief in a supernatural higher power. Sound familiar? When he was publicly criticized over his 1671 book, Theologico-Political Treatise, by the Calvinist governor of Utrecht, who said that Spinoza, to avoid being faulted for superstition, seems to have cast off all religion, Spinoza responded, as someone who maintains that God must be recognized as the highest good and should be freely and loved as such, cast off all religion, is someone who holds that our greatest happiness and freedom consist only in this love of God, irreligious, or that the reward of virtue is virtue itself, whereas the punishment of folly and weakness is folly itself. And finally, that each person ought to love his neighbor and obey the commands of the supreme power. Not only have I explicitly said these things, I have also proven them by the strongest arguments. Like many reason-oriented theologians from the Enlightenment era down to the present, Spinoza believed in the superiority and inevitable triumph of religious ideas that were reasonable and proven by the strongest arguments. I'm sure he believed it wouldn't take long for his theology to wipe away the superstitious religions still plaguing Europe, in his opinion. Unfortunately, he underestimated the power of emotion and feeling in religion, the power of cherished beliefs, familiar rituals, sacred text, music, and architecture on the human psyche. It's hard to convince anyone to abandon their familiar religious beliefs and embrace new ones, especially with a logical argument, no matter how sound. There's a reason you don't see Spinozist churches when you visit Europe. I believe Spinoza was one of the most uniquely brilliant thinkers of the 17th century. And Spinoza's God is a concept worthy of exploration by modern seekers. In many ways, I think he was centuries ahead of his time as a theologian. It's no surprise to me at all that Einstein believed in Spinoza's God, a concept of God that includes everything in the universe and all of its laws and creative processes. God is everywhere, and everything that exists is a modification of God. I think it is fair to call Spinoza a classic pantheist, but there are so many nuances to consider. I hope this brief reflection will inspire some of you to check out Spinozism in your spiritual journey. I invite you now to join in singing our closing hymn, number 25, God of the earth, the sky, the sea. Our closing words are an excerpt from the poem One or Two Things by Mary Oliver. The god of dirt came up to me many times and said, "So many wise and delectable things I lay on the grass listening to his dog voice, crow voice, frog voice, now," he said, "and now, and never once mentioned forever. which has nevertheless always been like a sharp iron hoof at the center of my mind.
Please join me now in reading the words for the extinguishing of the chalice flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.